All right, Ken, are you ready? The ready? Okay. Bye. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Uh, hello. Um, my name's Diane. I'm from the Park City Museum. Thanks for coming tonight. We appreciate it. Um, we are going to, I'm going to make this short and sweet today. So I'm going to introduce Jake from Grow the Flow. There are packets and information outside. So if you'd like to take something on your way out today, please feel free. And hope you learn a lot today and enjoy the lecture. So Jake Dreyfous is a fifth-generation Utahn and holds a degree in environmental studies and biology from Middlebury College. He is a passionate bird watcher, waterfowler, skier, and fly fisherman. He has worked for the Nature Conservancy of Utah, the Woodwell Climate Research Center's Community Science Initiative, Science on the Fly, Save the Bay, and the Utah Rivers Council. Jake works for the managing director of Grow the Flow to ensure future generations of Utahns can enjoy the Great Salt Lake and its ecosystem without the threat of its loss. So without further ado, Jake.
Sure. How's it going, everyone? Thanks for being here. We got a packed house. This is awesome. So, as Diane mentioned, my name is Jake Dreyfous. I'm the managing director of Grow the Flow. And today we're going to be talking about the Great Salt Lake Rescue. And more specifically, if Utah can turn the tide, or if we'll follow the same fate as many other sister saline lakes around the world. So to start out, I figured I would give you a little bit of context about who I am. I'm a fifth-generation Utahn. This is a photo of the historic Great Saltaire on Great Salt Lake. I grew up on stories of this place from my grandmother, who used to live in Bingham, Utah, which is now located near where the copper smelter is on the South Shore. She would tell me stories of going out there on the weekends, taking the train car from Salt Lake City and swimming in this lake like these many people are here, and just coming to this place as a place of community, a place of gathering, something that's been largely lost from the lake in recent decades. I'm a duck hunter. I grew up hunting the Great Salt Lake wetlands with my dad, along Farmington Bay and other areas along the shore where millions and millions of waterfowl come every year. I'm also a bird watcher, which might feel like an oxymoron, but those things can coexist. I was on the water today admiring avocets and stilts and many, many ducks and coots, great blue herons. And I'm a skier, like many of us in this room probably are, growing up skiing the greatest snow on Earth, which is largely a product of Great Salt Lake and our lake effect storms. I'm also a fisherman. Before I started this work, I spent my summers as a guide on the Weber and Provo River, two of the main tributaries to Great Salt Lake. And you may be asking, why are you telling me all about this about yourself? I thought you were here to learn about Great Salt Lake. And in one way or another, all of these things that are integral to me and my upbringing and my understanding of this state and my home are connected to the lake. And lastly, I'm a recent college graduate. So I graduated from Middlebury College in 2023 after spending my life here in Utah, traveling away for a few years and immediately coming back. And that was a very intentional decision, a decision I made to do this work, to fight for our home and to fight for Great Salt Lake, which stands in the way of my future and my ability to raise kids here and to provide future generations with similar opportunities for access and recreation and the many inherent and unconscious benefits that the lake provides us. And so this is a quote from some youth organizers who are part of the Youth Coalition for Great Salt Lake. Many applaud young people for taking notice of the issues affecting us. The bitter reality is that we don't have a choice. The new generation faces the unique struggle of having to fight for our future or risk losing it. And that's really this quote and this sentiment is what motivates me to do this work. It's a fight for a future and a fight for my home. And so I'll start out with a question, and I've got a couple more for you. Does anyone want to give me what they think the definition of an ecosystem is? No need to be shy here. Come on. We got years and years of knowledge in this room. Yeah.
Ecosystem you can find a certain use or not.
Yep, that's great. Anyone else want to add to that?
I think that's
That's almost right on the money there. So in the simplest form, an ecosystem is all the living and non-living things interacting in an area. Despite being in this room right now, we're part of an ecosystem. And with that in mind, does anyone notice maybe what's missing from this photo? We have birds, we have plants, rocks, dirt, turtles, dragonflies, people. That's exactly right. And a lot of the times we find ourselves disconnected from our ecosystems. We find ourselves inside homes. We find ourselves peering over these beautiful mountains, but feeling like we're separated from them. But innately, we are not. We are part of them. And more so than any other species in the world, we control those ecosystems. We manage them. We change them. We alter them. And we can also conserve them and improve them. And so with that in mind, we think about Great Salt Lake, this big salty water in the middle of the desert. And it might feel like, oh, there can't be too many of these. We're alone. This is a really unique place. So what percentage of global volume do we think around the world is saline, meaning salty? Raise your hand if you think it's 2%. 10%? 25? Okay. 35? 50%? For our mathematicians, 120%? Well, the answer here is 50%. So half of the water on Earth, half of landlocked water on lake volume is actually salty.
That's it.
So there's many, many of these ecosystems, just like Great Salt Lake, all around the world. And with that in mind, Great Salt Lake is also a terminal lake, meaning it has inlets but no outlets. So the only way that water goes out of the lake is through evaporation. So what do we think the largest terminal lake in the world is? Do we think it's the Caspian Sea? Lac Nord in Europe? Lake Victoria in Africa? The Great Salt Lake? No one? Or maybe it's the Aral Sea or Mar Chiquita in Argentina, the Aral Sea? The answer is the Caspian Sea. And so our executive director's son is actually named after this lake. Shows you how much interest he's got in these places, right? And this is a global image of the Caspian Sea, just showing you the scale and mass of this beautiful body of water, which is facing a similar fate as Great Salt Lake, rapidly shrinking due to human water use. And with that in mind, around the world, taking all of these saline lakes into account, how much of the global lake area do we think has been lost? Do we think it's 10%? Still got 90% left, 25%, 35%, 60%, 95%, only 5% left, or mathematicians, 120, anyone? The answer is 60%. So over half of the global terminal lake volume, saline lake volume, has been lost, has disappeared due to human overuse of water. And this is visualizing that loss. So here we have over 100 saline lakes around the world. You can see, some in Argentina, that's Mar Chiquita, Lake Popo. We've got places in India, and on all 6 continents except Antarctica, these saline lakes are found. And on all 6 continents, they are in a state of decline. On average, they've lost around 60%, but some of them, are all the way on the brink of complete disappearance, 80, 90, 95% gone. And this is visualizing that loss. 2 of the largest saline lakes in the world, Lake Ormia and the Aral Sea. And with the case of the Aral Sea, humans thought we could engineer our way out of the problem. They built dikes. They cut a river through the desert to try to bring more water to the lake. They cut it into quadrants, just creating this tiny little sliver of all that's left. And ultimately, they couldn't solve it because the answer to these problems is to add more water, not to try to cut the lake size in half or a quarter or a tenth of its original size. I think it's just a really visually just really compelling and moving to see the scale of that shrinking in just a few short decades. And Great Salt Lake story is not that different from these other saline lakes. So this time lapse is showing Great Salt Lake from its high in the mid-80s to its record low in 2022.
Yeah.
And so currently, as of today, the lake is sitting at an elevation of 4193.4 feet above sea level. For the average person, that probably doesn't mean much, right? We're just giving you an elevation. What the heck does that mean for a lake? But the minimum healthy level, as defined by the state, is 4198. So we're about 5 feet below that minimum healthy level, and with a good buffer to get us to 4,200, more than 7 feet below. And that puts us at a water volume of only 40% full. So just like the larger collapse of saline lakes around the world, 60% of Great Salt Lake's water is gone. And that has exposed over 1,100 square miles of lake bed that used to be covered with water, that is now playas of dust that is coming into our communities, impacting the air we breathe, impacting agriculture, impacting our economy. And this isn't something that is a distant, far-off future. This is our present. This is the reality we are living in the air that we are breathing today. So this is visualizing our watershed, Great Salt Lake, and all the rivers and streams and tributaries that flow into it. Just below Great Salt Lake there, you can see Utah Lake, that kind of brownish green lake there, which is actually one of the largest freestanding lakes west of the Mississippi. I think the third largest. Over on your guys' left-hand side of the screen, you can see Bear Lake, that beautiful Caribbean-colored water that we've all come to know and love if you've ever spent time up there. And then obviously in the middle, we have Great Salt Lake, split in two by that causeway, which was built in 1959, dividing the lake into this pink hypersaline half and this rich blue-green southern half, where a lot of our birds and other species rely on the wetlands and the robust brine shrimp and brine flies that keep this ecosystem alive and thriving. This image also tells a story. It tells a story of an ancient Lake Bonneville, where you have the Bonneville salt flats extending all the way to the west. The Uinta Mountains there in the bottom of your screen, telling the story of this ancient, giant, prehistoric lake that would have covered Salt Lake Valley in hundreds of feet of water. And Great Salt Lake is what remains. But even that is continuing to shrink. And so we have this simple equation when we're thinking about lake volume, terminal lake volume. Because they have no outlets, the lake is going to rise, and we're going to be able to guess or understand the level of the lake based on runoff, how much water goes into the lake every spring when our snow melts, direct precipitation, how much water falls onto the lake when it rains or snows, and then the loss of water is driven by evaporation, how much water comes off the lake in our hot summer months and goes back into the water cycle. And so of these things, what do we think are affected by humans? Runoff, yep, right? We're using water before it gets there. How about direct precipitation or evaporation? Yeah, climate change, right? So we've got, changes to our hydrological system that have been altered by changes in the climate. We're seeing hotter summers, which is increasing evaporation, longer summers, which is extending the evaporation season, and changes in the way that we're getting precipitation. I don't know about you guys, but there was a lot of rain in Salt Lake Valley this winter. And even up here in Park City, when we are used to seeing snow. I mean, it felt a little odd to me that our biggest snowfall of the year happened a few weeks ago in March, right? When we're used to getting, inches or even feet of snow in Salt Lake Valley through January and February, and as late as May sometimes if we're lucky. And so like you guys mentioned, right, our water use is directly affecting runoff, the amount of water going to the lake. And then our lake shrinkage, our direct precipitation and evaporation are being impacted by the shrinkage of the lake and climate change. And with the lake shrinking is this very interesting relationship, right? So Great Salt Lake, as we probably know, is what is the source of our lake effect snowstorms, what gives us this wonderful, beautiful, fluffy powder that we all have loved to ski over the years. And as the lake shrinks, that hydrological connection is weakened. And so not only are we losing the amount of rain or snow that we're getting due to climate, but the shrinking of this lake is directly impacting the precipitation and our water supply here in northern Utah. And looking more closely at who is using the water, in other words, what is driving the lake's decline, About 75% of the water use in Great Salt Lake Basin is for agriculture, to grow things like alfalfa and hay crops, things like wheat, but also food like corn and onions and peaches and cherries, things that used to be grown far more widely than they are today, with widespread development across our state. About 9 to 12%, we got 9% on there, but depends who you ask, is used by people like me and you for residential water use. And the overwhelming majority of that is for outdoor water use, to keep our grass green in the middle of the summer when we live in a desert, to water our gardens, to grow residentially, things like that. And then the other 9% is from mineral extractors directly on the lake. I'm sure you guys have maybe seen those beautiful photos that we'll show you later of these solar evaporation ponds where they're extracting critical minerals and fertilizers and different elements that play a really important role in our local economy, but also communities around the world. And then finally, we have 8%, which is evaporated before it makes it to Great Salt Lake, when it's in reservoirs like Jordanelle or Deer Creek or Rockport, right around here in Park City. So ultimately, the lake's decline can be largely attributed to upstream diversion from limiting runoff. About 80% of the lake's decline could be attributed to this, and only 20% can be attributed to things like climate change, prolonged drought. And this might seem daunting, but for me, it's a source of hope. It tells me, humans locally are the problem here. We locally are using too much water, which provides us a simple solution: to use less. And that's harder than to do than it is to say, but it is a lot more possible than trying to make a huge difference on climate in our state, when ultimately, emitters around the globe are driving the majority of warming. And for a simple round number, the lake needs an additional 1 million acre feet of water to reach it every single year. And an acre foot is the amount of water it takes to cover an acre in a foot of water. So imagine a football field with a foot of water. We need 1 million of those more, which is a lot. The average household uses about half an acre foot per year. And that equates to a 30 to 50% decrease in consumptive water use across the Great Salt Lake Basin, which is a big goal to try to reach. But frankly, Utah has not been very water conscious in the way that we use our resources, which gives us a lot of opportunity to improve and to reach those numbers. And the stakes could not be higher when we're thinking about Great Salt Lake. Predominantly, we're going to see impacts to our human health, to the air we breathe, to the habitat, and to our economy. Looking at that image on your guys' left-hand side, that's showing the different migratory patterns of just a handful of the many countless species that migrate through or rely on Great Salt Lake. We have species like the northern pintail, which travels all the way to the Arctic in our summer, and south all the way to South America in the winter. The Wilson's phalarope, which has been petitioned to be listed as endangered, travels and is found at Great Salt Lake in higher concentrations than anywhere else in the world, before it travels all the way to Argentina, to Mar Chiquita, that lake that I mentioned before, and finds its winter nesting grounds. Our winter, their summer. We have things like tundra swans, which are concentrated on Great Salt Lake this time of year by the thousands at the wildlife refuge in different wetland complexes around the lake. Even things like burrowing owls, which you can see by the dozens if you go out to Antelope Island in a month or so. And then we have human health caused by the dust on Great Salt Lake. Dust storms, this is showing a dust storm from the Salton Sea in California. And it's creating a really compelling visual story that it's telling. You can see these squares, these agricultural fields, which drove the lake's decline and ultimately drove the collapse of agriculture in the region. Because there was no water in the Salton Sea, the hydrology of the area became limited. It became reduced. And not only that, but as this dust travels across this area, it lands and coats these agricultural fields, making them more alkaline, more saline, making it harder to grow crops that are productive, making it harder to bring those crops to market. And what it isn't showing here is the people that are impacted by that dust. So the Salton Sea has asthma rates 30% higher than the national average. They have higher rates of different cardiovascular issues, premature, developmental issues, complications with pregnancy. These are all things that have been documented around the world when these saline lakes decline. And the Salton Sea also has around 30,000 people that live around it. And it's about 1/10 the size of Great Salt Lake, which has 2.5 million people that live within 20 miles of the lake shore. And then finally, we have our economy. We have an image here. That's my boss skiing up above Utah Lake, taking some turns in our big snow season we had a couple of years ago. And, it's speaking to our ski industry, which relies on the snow that we all get to ski. And the lake produces about 10% of our region's snowpack through these lake effect storms. Recent modeling has shown that up to 50% of regional precipitation along the Wasatch Front is a product of Great Salt Lake. The difference between the semi-arid environment that we live in Salt Lake City and the Great Salt Lake Desert, the West Desert. If you've ever been out there, they're a little bit different. And it's also standing to impact an existing multi-billion-dollar Great Salt Lake economy, where we extract things like lithium and magnesium, fertilizers that feed our country and different things like that. And so to do a little bit of a deeper dive, what do we stand to gain or what do we stand to lose if we let Great Salt Lake continue to decline? This is an image of the solar evaporation ponds west of Ogden, managed by Compass Minerals. And here's an image of some pistachios, some table shrimp, an F-16, an iPhone, and a soda can. What the heck do these have in common? You can't have anything in common, right? But in the context of where we are, they're all connected to Great Salt Lake and the industries on it. So our tree nuts that are grown in California, across the Central Valley, avocados as well, are fueled by the Great Salt Lake, by potassium sulfate that's harvested from it. About 40% of the fertilizer in the Central Valley comes from Great Salt Lake, and 25% of all the vegetables that we eat in the United States come from the Central Valley. So the Great Salt Lake, in an interconnected way, is feeding our country. You got table shrimp. Well, we only got brine shrimp at Great Salt Lake, right? We all know about those. But 50% of the global market of harvested brine shrimp comes from Great Salt Lake. And their eggs, which are hatched and turn into these little brine shrimp, feed aquaculture industries across the world, are a vital source of food for these industries in developing countries like Malaysia and Indonesia. And so odds are, if you've had shrimp recently, they were fed by Great Salt Lake. F-16s and iPhones, right? What do those have to do with Great Salt Lake? Well, it's the single largest domestic source of many critical minerals that are used in the production of these things that we use every day. Maybe not F-16s, but our iPhones and our computers and Apple Watches nonetheless have things like magnesium and lithium in them that are harvested from Great Salt Lake and exported across the globe to places like China and Taiwan, where they're used to create these technologies that we rely on and are more and more dependent on. And finally, soda cans. The magnesium in Great Salt Lake is used in the production of aluminum from our soda cans. And so I like to show this image because it really demonstrates how the lake, is inherently important to our own economy here, but also is critical to communities around the globe and is this interconnector that brings us closer to disparate, far-off countries and states. And ultimately, saving Great Salt Lake is an act in putting our country first. It's an act in ensuring that we have reliable, consistent sources of these critical minerals and can stay competitive with other countries like China and, countries that are developing and extracting these minerals from other places, like the cobalt industry in Africa or magnesium industry in Central Africa. And being able to sustainably harvest these minerals from Great Salt Lake positions Utah as a global leader in the production of these things that help us in so many ways. And the habitat, the ecology, it cannot be overlooked. So 10 to 12 million migratory birds either rest, feed, or breed on Great Salt Lake and in its wetlands. This includes 338 different species, 2 to 5 million eared grebes, which make up about 80% of the North American population, all of which can be found on the Great Salt Lake in the fall. If you go out to Antelope Island from October to early December and you get your binoculars as far as you can see, no matter which way you look, you'll just see these rafts of eared grebes out there. It's pretty remarkable. 3 to 4 million waterfowl. This is very important to me as a duck hunter. I'd like to be able to continue to do that and teach my kids how to do it someday too. Many of which are found, just like the grebes, in higher concentrations on the lake than anywhere else in the world. Hundreds of thousands of cinnamon teal, 1 million green-winged teal, huge concentrations of gadwall and mallards, and 1.4 million shorebirds. These really magnificent birds like avocets and stilts and plovers and phalaropes, which are really unique and not really found in these arid desert environments like we have here. And more, due to habitat loss and the desiccation of these saline lakes and other places, Great Salt Lake is one of the last remaining habitats that these species can rely on. And so without the lake, many of these species face endangerment, extinction, and with that comes endangered species listings, huge amounts of federal oversight, and work from the federal government to try to take control of the way that we save the lake and the way that we manage this resource, which in a small state government like Utah, or small government state like Utah, that's not the first option or the first choice for many of our legislators. And we also have really cool birds like pelicans. Like, who knew 40,000 pelicans nested on Great Salt Lake every year? Grebes, kingfishers, blackbirds, nightjars, hummingbirds, wrens, falcons, eagles, owls, you name it. And like I mentioned before, there's also this less talked about impact from the dust, which is this impact on our snow. So we have this beautiful, untouched, lush looking snowfield here from the Wasatch Mountains. And this is what it looks like when it has dust all over it. Dirty, not as appealing to the eye, that's for sure. But it also accelerates runoff and makes it less efficient. Recent research has demonstrated that it accelerates snowmelt by up to 3 weeks, 17 to 21 days. That's less days skiing for us, but more importantly, it makes our runoff less efficient. It makes it harder for us to capture the melted snowpack. 95% of our water that we drink and use every day comes from our snowpack. And it poses serious water security issues in our ability to manage water amidst a growing population, amidst increasing demand, and amidst a less stable climate. And finally, there's the dust. What we hear about more than probably anything else. The image on your guys' left is from Mar Chiquita, a saline lake in Argentina, where those phalaropes go every winter. And that is a 600-kilometer dust plume coming off the lake. Mar Chiquita is about the same size as Great Salt Lake. So that puts our dust events traveling all the way into places like Colorado and north into even, central to northern Idaho. And on the left there, or my left, your right, you have what used to be the Aral Sea, what used to be a robust fishery, what used to fuel thousands and thousands of people's livelihoods through these barges that are now on sand dunes, more reminiscent of the Sahara than a lake. And then finally, you have this community from Lake Titicaca in Bolivia that lived on the lake. They built these really remarkable, I would recommend you all look up photos, but they built these remarkable floating islands made out of reeds that they would live on all the time. And as that lake has disappeared, so has their livelihood. Thousands and thousands of years of culture has gone with it. And sometimes I think it's easy being up in here in Park City on the Wasatch back to say, how does this issue impact me? Why should I care about Great Salt Lake? But ultimately, due to the image of the dust on snow that I just demonstrated, or that I just showed, It's going to impact our snowpack, our water security, but it also has the potential to impact the air we breathe here in Summit County. So that image on the right, or I'll start with the one on your left, is both of these are from Dr. Kevin Perry, an atmospheric scientist at the University of Utah. A few years ago, he spent several months circumnavigating the entire lake on his bicycle and taking samples from the entire lake to understand where are the highest concentrations of dust that could become airborne and impact our communities, and what is that dust made up of. And so you'll see in that sort of zoomed in piece here, this is Farmington Bay and Antelope Island, which isn't much of an island as of now, and Bear River Bay. Those also happen to be where the dust hotspots are most concentrated. And these are also where most of the people are closest to. So Farmington Bay is a 20-minute drive from downtown Salt Lake City. Bear River Bay is 5 miles west of the heart of our agricultural production here in northern Utah, and communities like Brigham City and Ogden. And so in less than an hour, that dust, during a dust event, dust is going to travel to Salt Lake, to Ogden, to Brigham City, all the way south, nearing the northern extent of Utah Lake. In 2 hours, it makes its way across the Wasatch Front to the Wasatch back, reaching Park City, into Logan, even across the state border into southern Idaho. And in just 3 hours of a dust event, we're going all the way north of Bear Lake. We're reaching the Uinta Mountains, south all the way pretty much to the southern extent of the watershed. A funny Middlebury connection is a geology professor from Middlebury has actually studied Great Salt Lake dust in the Uintas. And I never took a class with him, but Kevin Perry knows him. And I think one time we talked about our shared Utah connection in the halls. But that's all to say, the dust is not something that's contained to our little city of Salt Lake. It's something that stands to impact communities across all of northern Utah. And ultimately, our ability to save Great Salt Lake is not a scientific problem. It's a cultural one. It's a reflection of our values. Do we want to live in a place like the image on the left, a beautiful, clear day with our snow-caked Wasatch Mountains in this wonderful city, this growing city in the front with clear skies, clean air? Or do we want to live in a place like the image on the right? This is an image taken during a Great Salt Lake dust event, where dust has created a haze across the valley, impacting the air we breathe, impacting our ability to recreate, to go outside and feel safe about it. And it's a reflection of our desire to create a long-standing, sustainable, and beautiful home for our future generations, for young people like myself, but also for me, for kids that I hope to one day raise. I've never known another home than Utah. I've never known another home than Salt Lake Valley and the Wasatch Front. The mountains and Great Salt Lake, the rivers that feed into it, are what raised me, or what gave me my understanding of this place that I call home. And if you ask me, I want to live in a place like the one on the left. And I get sick of seeing the air when it looks like the one on the right. And we got a lot of work to do to get there, but ultimately, I believe we can. Because like I said, this is not a scientific problem. It's a matter of public and political will and commitment to getting this issue right. No community around the world has reversed the collapse of a saline lake. That's a scary fact, right? This is a big problem we're trying to solve. But I believe that Utah can become the first. And if we do, it positions Utah as a global leader, not a regional or national, a global leader on water conservation. It gives us the toolkit of solutions that we can bring to communities around the globe and help them solve this unsolved environmental crisis. It allows us to demonstrate that environmental stewardship is a value that all Utahns believe in. Regardless of your faith, regardless of your political ideology, we all care about these landscapes. That's what brought us here. Maybe recently, maybe generations ago, is the landscape that we get to call home. And finally, it's an opportunity to build bridges and build coalition in an era marked by immense political polarization. to find room for bipartisan bridge building, to find room for compromise and collaboration, when often it feels like we can't agree with someone who doesn't believe the same thing when we're trying to figure out what to have for dinner. This is really an issue that affects us all, and we should all care about it. And we need to create and message this issue in a way that is inviting to everyone, inviting to farmers in Brigham City, inviting to LDS families in Utah Valley, to rural voters in Price. Everyone should care about Great Salt Lake because it will impact them in one way or another. So how are we, Grow the Flow, working to grow the flow by 1 million acre feet at a time? I love this image. This is a snowy plover, which is also found on Great Salt Lake in larger concentrations than anywhere else in the Western United States. This is a little baby. He's about this big, probably. And he's running through and feeding on brine shrimp, which are found by the millions in the summer on the lake. And we're doing this in a few ways. So first, we have our public action network. And the ultimate goal of the public action network is to build a politically and geographically diverse coalition of 100,000 members in Utah, but also in Idaho and Wyoming. So the Bear River, the largest tributary to Great Salt Lake, starts in the Uintas, goes across into Wyoming through Evanston, into Idaho up to Bear Lake, and then back down south until finally reaching Great Salt Lake. And about a third of the water use on that river falls in Idaho and Wyoming. So we need to build coalition and do work in these sister states as well. But we also need to be extending this issue beyond a place like Salt Lake City that is more environmentally inclined, let's say. We need to, build coalition in places like Summit County, in Heber Valley, in Utah Valley, and especially in northern Utah, in places like Logan and Brigham City and Cache Valley, where not only do we have really powerful state representatives and senators there, but this is also the heart of agriculture and thus the heart of water consumption. And we need to create a solution that doesn't cast farmers aside, that doesn't buy them out and lets them, wring out to dry in the sun. We need to create a solution that allows them to continue to farm, but also enables them to make money by leasing their water, to easily switch to more water efficient crops if they so decide to, and be able to support them along that path. And so our public action network is doing things like what you are all at today, listening in on a lecture, facilitating trainings, putting on community events, town halls, candidate forums to make sure our elected officials are prioritizing this issue. And then one thing that we're putting a lot of resources in and looking to continue to develop is a marketing and public messaging campaign for the lake. There's no nonprofit or state entity that is educating the public and casting a blanket of information on this issue. And so the first step that we took to address this is some billboards. Who doesn't love billboards? I don't really like them, but a lot of people see them, right? And so our billboard that you can see there is looking at a live tracker of the Great Salt Lake water level. As people drive down the highway, they're going to know how the Great Salt Lake is doing. And currently that's conveying it's not doing so well. So the lake's at about 40% full. That's what that image is denoting there. And we're trying to provide more accessible and digestible information for the average viewer. We think, this 4190 whatever is a little inaccessible. It's confusing and not very persuading when you're trying to get people to get involved and care about an issue. So we're trying to make all of our information accessible and digestible. And moving forward in the coming months, we'll be starting with some radio advertisements, public service announcement videos that will be running through social media, digital advertising, maybe even TV, and things of the like. And then we have our policy accelerator. So we work very closely with the University of Utah's Environmental Law School, the Stegner Center, and their director there, Brigham Daniels. And they are working on municipal water policy analyses right now to say, okay, Ogden, this is what you're doing right now. These are the 3 changes that you can make to save 20% more water. Or Park City, this is how you guys are kicking butt, but this is what you need to do better. And providing a toolkit for our municipal governments to improve. They're drafting and vetting legislation right now for the 2025-26 session and the 26-27 legislative session. This legislative session, we didn't see the progress that we needed, and we can't afford another session where we find ourselves in the passenger seat. We need to be providing our legislators with the tools that they need to succeed. Most of our state representatives are either farmers or developers. So not many of them know much about water law. But that's not to say that they don't care about the issue. If we can provide them with politically possible, economically viable, technically feasible, and ecologically sustainable policy that we know will make an impact, we've got a lot better chance of passing that policy into law and accelerating the rate of change we need in order to refill the lake. And over the next several years, we're going to be working on more federal government coordination. This is a big problem to solve, and it's got a big price tag on it. But that price tag is dwarfed by the cost of inaction. So we need to garner federal support for more funding. Just last year, at the end of the Biden administration, $50 million for Great Salt Lake was approved through the Inflation Reduction Act, and that money is starting to be distributed now. So that's a great start, but we need to see that sustained and increased over time. And to put into scale the cost of inaction, we can look at Owens Lake. This is a terminal lake in California. In the early 20th century, Owens Lake was drained to feed a growing Los Angeles. This is what the movie Chinatown is based after. And a few years later, that lake was completely dry. And today, that lake is the largest single source of carcinogenic dust in the United States. It has cost LA ratepayers $2.5 billion simply to mitigate the dust. Great Salt Lake is 15 times the size and has a population 100 times greater around it. And finally, we have our research bridge. So this ultimately is run by an ecologist out of BYU named Rachel Wood, and she's coordinating national and international experts to come together across institutions and fields of expertise to turn evidence into actual solutions by looking at other communities and say, what's worked for you, what hasn't, how can we improve those things and bring them to our home to try and save Great Salt Lake. And I want to end here with a few things that you can do, right? Because ultimately, this is a problem caused by people, and we're all people here, and we're all inside the watershed. And so there are some actions that you all can take, and I'll start with water conservation. So as I mentioned, around 60% of our outdoor water use is used to water big grass green lawns, like we live in England or North Carolina that gets 50 inches of rain a year. And so one thing that you can do to make a sizable impact in your water conservation goals, but also on your monthly checkbook, is to replace your grass landscaping with things like native plants. You consider xeriscaping, removing your grass lawns to implement more water efficient plants and vegetation. Not only does this reduce the amount of water you're using, it also creates more habitat for our pollinators, which are steeply declining across the globe, and creates more native landscapes here in our homes. And there's some really awesome state programs to help subsidize the cost of this, undergoing this endeavor. The state has rebates to quote unquote flip your strip, get rid of your grass and replace it with water efficient landscaping. An employee from one of the water conservancy districts around the state will actually come to your home and give you a free assessment of what it would look like to flip your strip. And you also have these awesome resources called conservation gardens at places like the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, where you can see the potential that your lawn has that you're not realizing right now. And then at the heart of our work is legislative advocacy. That's why we're trying to rally hundreds of thousands of people to care about this issue, because ultimately our state represents us. Our representatives and senators work for us. We are the leaders and not them. But far too often, they don't hear from their constituents. And so a few simple and really quick actions that you can take are, within your own communities. We've had some really awesome volunteers do this through their churches, through their assisted living homes, through their yoga community. You get your people together and you write some letters to your representative or senator. asking them to prioritize Great Salt Lake, to take action, to be willing to run policy. During the legislative session, we have more specific asks. Vote yes on this bill, vote no on that bill. But your time is still well spent advocating and communicating with your state representatives right now. If you don't want to write letters, even easier is email them. All of their emails are publicly available. And if you give them a call, you're calling their direct line. It's not like our federal our federal representatives and senators where they've got countless staffers and you go through this bureaucratic process. Our legislators do this on a part-time basis, and so they don't have a work phone. They just got their cell phone. And so you leaving them a voicemail, it's going straight to their direct line. And this is a great way to communicate with them and also build a relationship. So when the legislative session does come around, or you have something more specific to ask of them, they're a lot more willing to field your requests. And in a place like Park City, this can really make a difference. Our lake impacts our snowpack and impacts our ski industry. This community is fueled by that ski industry, by tourism and recreation that flocks here by the hundreds and the thousands to ski at world-renowned resorts. And so advocating on the need to address Great Salt Lake to protect and extend our ski industry and snowpack is a really compelling point for our representatives and senators in this area. You can also participate in rallies and demonstrations, town halls, and trainings. You're already doing that right now. So thank you all for being here. And we also have a really cool chapter model. So right now we have Grow the Flow chapters established in Ogden, Logan, Salt Lake Valley, and Utah County. We're looking to start one for the Wasatch Back here in Summit County. And this gives you a consistent and in-person opportunity to organize with like-minded individuals, or maybe they don't believe in everything that you believe in, but we both care about the lake. It gives you a place to find community, which is something that I think we all desperately need in a post-pandemic world, where more and more these kind of things have gone online or hybrid, and it's harder to find those people that you can work with and take action with and do something good. And then finally, if you have the means, you can support our cause by donating to support this marketing effort that I went over, to support the vetting and drafting of policy, to support our grassroots organizing work, which is really critical in building the voice that we need to make a difference. You can volunteer with us. That looks like hanging out at events at our table and spreading the good word about the work we're doing. It looks like organizing events within your own communities, assisting us in doing some phone banking or canvassing. But really, we're here to support you. It's one thing we really pride ourselves is working closely with our volunteers. Just a few weeks ago, Rachel was working with a volunteer. Say hi, Rachel. She's our events manager. She was working with a volunteer who taught a yoga class on the shore of Great Salt Lake. We've had volunteers do painting nights at local community areas. We have a group of students that are hosting a concert for Great Salt Lake this weekend. And so if you have a dream, we'll help you turn it into a reality. And if you are a business owner or know people who are business owners or private sector leaders, we have a Great Salt Lake Business Council. And we see this as critical. We need grassroots, but we also need grass tops, especially in a place like Utah, whose motto is industry. The private sector holds a lot of influence and power, and we can use that for good to solve really complex, difficult issues like the decline of Great Salt Lake. And finally, you can spread the word or tell your story. If you have, some remarkable memories about Great Salt Lake from the 80s when it was overflowing and the pumps were being built to dump water into the West Desert. If you have stories about the first time you went as a kid or the last time you've gone and how haunting it was to remember the difference between a full lake and what it looks like today, come find us and we'll help you tell your story. And let's keep the conversation going. So this is just my information here, my email, cell phone number, and a picture of our link to our website. I'm always here to work with you, and so are the rest of our staff. But thank you all so much for listening me yap at you for 40 minutes, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
And just so you know, when we ask questions, we have to ask them into the microphone because otherwise the recording doesn't pick it up. So, all right, pass it down to Don.
Thank you for a very informative presentation. I see that 74% of water usage is agriculture.
Yes, sir.
Somewhere I read where if you went to inline irrigation, it would save 50% of the water, or somewhere around there. What are your thoughts on that subject?
Yeah, so that's one place where the state has put in a lot of money, some $250 million, to help farmers subsidize the cost of switching to more water efficient practices, like going from flood irrigation to inline or drip, or to those big center pivot sprinklers, and that can save water, but only if that is dedicated to Great Salt Lake. So maybe you guys have heard of the use it or lose it policy with water in Utah, right? If you have a water share and you don't use it all over a certain number of years, it's subject to forfeiture. That's not true anymore. And so you can actually save water and then do a change application for that saved water and dedicate it to conservation purposes. But not a single recipient of these state grants to improve efficiency has made that choice to save their water and dedicate it and get paid for putting that water towards conservation. So it's a good program, and we need to improve the efficiency of these systems, but there also needs to be a piece where we can guarantee that that saved water is actually getting to the lake or getting back into the rivers and not being further depleted by another user downstream.
Is
there a why? Because there's no innate incentive in doing so right now. And I think there's also an information gap where a lot of agricultural users still have this super valid fear of thinking, oh, if I lease this or move it to a different use, then I might lose it, or the state might take my water right. And this is a really, it's real property. It's something that they own, is this water right. And the risk of losing that is significant. So there's a need for education there.
There's a belief, perhaps, that with the 74%, as you pointed out, going to agriculture, that they are diverting I'm not pointing fingers, but the agriculture people, farmers, are diverting a huge amount of water that was intended or would have run off to the Great Salt Lake. And is the legislature going to ever address that issue?
Yeah, so the state has taken some steps to address agricultural water use through this agriculture optimization grant that I was just talking about, subsidizing up to 75% of the cost of switching to more water efficient practices, increasing metering and telemetry to be able to track water better, and they've also started to create water markets. So there's a thing called the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust, which sole purpose is to try to broker leases, acquire water rights, acquire donations of water rights. But frankly, that market is not working well right now. And so we need to figure out ways to make that market work. And that could be through having farmers just have to prove that they save water and not necessarily mandate that they do it in one way or another. And if they can prove those water savings, they should be compensated at market rate or above market rate. And we should be willing to pay top dollar to get that water to the lake. And in that way, you're not just kind of ostracizing farmers by saying, we're taking your water, we're taking your land, and you can go hit the road. You're giving them the opportunity to be financially compensated, and also continue to be able to farm on the land that they can't afford to do so on.
Is there a minimum number of water shares that are required?
If there is, I don't know that number, but there are something like 100,000 independent water users in the basin. So it's a really complex system. Ultimately, the more simpler way to think of it is how much water do we need? And that's around 1 million acre feet of additional inflows into the lake every year. So that's not the total amount of water. It's what we need on top of what's already getting there.
Okay, so in addition to the grant, or, is there an incentive, a financial incentive to donate water to this cause?
There really isn't. So right now there's been talk around creating like a a tax incentive, if people are trying to donate their water in a similar way that Greenbelt works or conservation easements work, to implement something similar with water to incentivize donation. But right now it's a goodness of the heart kind of thing.
I think
Just a two-parter, if I could. One is what has happened to that big old pump out there after the spring of '83? And number two, what's the visibility of the spiral jetty at this point?
Yeah, so the pumps are probably collecting rust and dust at this point. I can't really imagine a future where they'll ever be put back into operation. Even if we do save the lake, that was really unprecedented amount of water and flooding that we, all were impacted by. And then the second piece is this jetty is definitely visible, but it is also far away from the water. So when it was built by Robert Smithson back in the 70s, the water, was right around its edge and, was even covered at times. And now it's probably 500 to 1,000 yards from the lake shore.
not big.
You mentioned 1 million acre feet needed. How much is that in relation to how much actually does flow into the remote?
That's a good question. So I think the average inflows into the lake are around 1 million acre feet or so a year as they stand. So essentially we need to double the amount of water going into the lake. And right now, as much as 2/3 of all the water in the system is being depleted before it makes it.
But listen,
Yeah, she's coming. Don't worry.
that's the thing.
Takes a little time.
It's done.
Okay. I just got a notice email, I think, about rain barrels.
Yep.
And I have one. They're 50 gallons. They're really reasonable. I probably last summer, which wasn't necessarily really rainy, I probably could fill that 5 times. And I have it raised up so that gravity flows into my garden, which has no grass. And you also help birds and butterflies if you take the grass out. Some of those are endangered too. So check, I think it was the water department. I'm not sure where I got the email, sadly enough, because
Is it water side?
yeah. Oh, Jill Benton.
Yeah. So I think,
It's something that we can do locally.
yeah, rain barrels are a great, opportunity to, in a small way, address your outdoor water use. They are available for purchase through private companies. And then another nonprofit called the Utah Rivers Council also has a program to subsidize the cost for people that are interested in getting one. I'm not sure if that window of opportunity has come and gone already, but it is another way that you can address personal water use.
So I have never reached out to a local legislator. I was kind of wondering, what you would actually say in an email or phone call.
Yeah.
If you were to reach out.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it can be intimidating, right? Like it's like this guy up on the hill, this scary dude making all the decisions. But this time of year, you can keep the message really simple, right? There's not a specific piece of policy that you're advocating for. It's more of a general need to gauge and increase interest from your legislator. So it's really important to keep the message short, to the point. Always thank them for their service. Even better, if you can find a bill that they've sponsored or something that you both agree on, thank them for that specifically. Our legislators love a good pat on the back, like most of us do. And then the message that I would say that you should convey, this time of year is just a simple ask to, prioritize water conservation in Great Salt Lake in upcoming legislative sessions. And in the context of being here in Summit County, adding a piece of context around the fact that around 10% of our snowpack is a product of Great Salt Lake, that it helps fuel our multi-billion-dollar ski economy and outdoor recreation across the state, things that would resonate with your representative or senator here, go a long ways. And then if you want to go one step further, you can invite them to go and grab a coffee or grab lunch or something like that. And to this act of relationship building that can make it make your future advocacy a lot more effective.
Anyone else?
Just real quick, you mentioned possibly establishing a chapter in the Wasatch Back. Do you have any timeframes on that, or is there material on your table?
Time frame is semi-undefined, but I would say in the next 3 months or so, we'll probably be starting to establish that foundation. And if you sign up for our newsletter, which is like a really short and sweet, less than 500 words every week, communication on upcoming events, things we're working on, ways that you can engage, we'll definitely be making an announcement there once we're ready to roll.
Last quote?
Nope.
Thank you, Jake. We appreciate it.
It was